Hey everybody, Chuck Holton here, and I've got Bill Brown with us today on the Hot Zone. And you might say, but Bill who? Well, Bill is a professor of communications at Regent University. And so, blah, blah. That's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that he's a specialist when it comes to understanding and explaining propaganda and how information war is used against us all around the world. Is that right, Bill? Did I get that right?
Yeah, I teach a class, Chuck, called Media and Social Influence, and we have a whole section on propaganda, and this is one of the books that we use. It's
Nice.
an older book now, but it's a great book called Age of Propaganda, and I would say we're still in the age of propaganda, although this was written about 15 years ago or something like that.
So let's talk about I've always said that in every war, you have different, the military calls them battle spaces.
Mm-hmm.
You have the kinetic battle space where the bullets are flying,
Yeah.
and you have the signals battle space. You have the information battle space, and that's the
Sure.
court of public opinion. And I've said for years now that the information battle space is the most important battle space.
Mm-hmm.
It used to lag the kinetic battle space. If you go back to World War II or something like that, that it's not that propaganda didn't exist or that it wasn't important. It's that
Sure.
that the events on the ground on the battlefield shaped how propaganda was put out and put together, and
Right.
what it was meant to do. Now it seems to be the other way around. It's like the information battle space is the primary battle space, and by changing people's perceptions about the war, whatever war we're talking about, you can actually change the reality on the ground. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I absolutely would agree with that. Definitely. Yeah.
So the first time that I really ran into this was during the war on terror. I was in Iraq one time. I've been there 15 times probably, but on one of my trips, I think probably about 2007, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed at we stayed with the 3rd Infantry Division in Baghdad, and there was a media, they call it the MOC, media something. No, Media Engagement Center. That's what it was called, something like that. And it was the place where they brought all the journalists when they first got into country and gave them a little briefing,
Yeah.
and gave them some coffee and stuff, figured out what they were going to do. And it was right across from the palace that they used as their headquarters. That had been the palace of Saddam Hussein. In the back room of the Media Operations Center was an office with about 6 or 8 guys back there furiously pounding away on keyboards. And I wandered back there one time and got talking to one of those guys and was like, "What are you guys doing back here?" And he said, "Oh, well, we are putting out news stories about what's happening on the ground in order to shape public opinion of what the United States is doing here,"
Right.
and so on and so forth. And so it wasn't propaganda in the sense of putting out false information, trying to trick somebody into doing something or whatever.
Right.
It was more about trying to put out information in the right places, in the right format. So like in Arabic,
Sure.
they had started a whole bunch of social media accounts that appeared to be Arabic
Right.
speakers or whatever, and each one of them would have like 5 or 10 different accounts that he would log into and post different things about what was going on. And I was like, that was the first time I was with Oliver North at the time, and he was very good friends with the lady that ran that whole thing. And it actually morphed into what the website now known as the Long War Journal, if I'm not mistaken. So I found that really fascinating. So can you talk about the different kinds of propaganda, maybe kind of a positive propaganda, negative propaganda, or whatever, that sort of thing? Let's set the ground rules here to help people understand what these terms mean.
Yeah. Propaganda is really changed over the years, and of course it's changed according to how technology has changed. So the first use of propaganda, the first propaganda center was probably Pope Gregory the 15th. He actually had I wrote it down here. It's a papal office of propaganda.
Did he really?
The
Wow.
first times that it was used. So I think of propaganda I think of like three periods, basically before the age of modern media. So we could think of before the 20th century, and then the 20th century where there's really change, and now where we are now in the 21st century. So propaganda is as old as any form of communication. From writing hieroglyphics, the Egyptians used propaganda in their symbols to give a really positive image of those that were in authority, those that were in charge, and so forth. So you could go all the way back to then. And so symbolically, the Romans used propaganda. The Greeks used propaganda.
Yeah, can you give me an example?
Yeah, the famous commander Themistocles, something like that. When he deceived Xerxes using propaganda, which was critical in the war. The Romans.
What about like the Trojan horse? Would the Trojan horse have been considered propaganda in a way? Or information warfare?
Or maybe information warfare. Yeah, and that was like 480 BC was that battle with Xerxes. The Greeks used propaganda through theater mainly and rhetoric and public speaking. Caesar was great at propaganda. He used propaganda all the time. He was good at it. And you can go all the way up from ancient Greece, ancient Rome, all the way up, and you look at every civilization, they used propaganda in I would define it as basically needing four different elements. Number one, it's intentional. So you're purposefully trying to influence the attitudes, beliefs, and behavior of people. Second, it's biased. It doesn't present information in
like a neutral tone, or
it presents it selectively. So even in the example that you gave of those that were working in Iraq or Afghanistan,
Mm-hmm.
They're still selectively choosing certain information to share and certain information to withhold. So they're not being deceptive, but they are being intentionally selective. Third, it has an emotional appeal. So you're usually trying to pull on people's emotions, and particularly the emotions that stir people up, that trigger people, like anger, for example, and fear, those kinds of things. And fourth, you use a lot of repetition. So, you keep repeating it over and over again in different forms, in different ways, in order to persuade your audience to believe something, think something, act in a certain way. So
I think if any of our viewers have made the mistake recently of turning on the television, they're listening to what you're saying right now, and they're going, that sounds like pretty much everything I see online anymore.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So as a professor that's training these young college kids, my daughter among them, to recognize and think critically about what they're being fed by the media and social media. Right. I think everybody is to the point where they kind of understand that the media is going to feed them from whatever point of view that they want you to take. So I think everybody gets that. But what is frustrating to me is how many people are getting their quote unquote news or their information from people who, if just social media posts, who literally have either no idea what they're talking about or are intentionally trying to skew your thought processes so that you don't understand the truth. So how do you equip your students to avoid that?
Yeah, I try to use colorful metaphors, like the internet is like a junkyard. You can go to a junkyard and you can find some valuable things in a junkyard. But most of it is garbage. And social media is just notorious, and there's a lot of research on social media, and most of the research shows that if you use social media more, you're more manipulated. If you use social media more, you're more depressed. If you use social media more, you're more lonely. You're more, because you're comparing yourself with everybody else. You're more suicidal. The effects are not good. And it's easily manipulated. And social media is one of the biggest battlefields right now for propaganda. And there's very sophisticated types of information technology like bots. I think most people have heard of bots, or software programs that can manipulate things and act like they're people making posts, but they're not. They're programs that are making posts. And so one of the propaganda strategies of a lot of countries is to create these echo chambers. So echo chamber, is think of networks of people that all are thinking the same thing or agreeing with one another pretty much. And so you're not learning anything new in an echo chamber. Your own whatever biases that you have are being just reinforced by everybody else, in your little group. And so those echo chambers can actually be increased by bots and so forth. So you think, no, this is my perspective is right, and you don't realize that you have such a really biased perspective, and you're being cut off from all kinds of other information that's contrary to what your perspective is. So think of the simple thing like a good corporate leader does not all have yes people on his or her board. You need no people. You need people from seeing things from diverse perspectives, or you could easily fall off into a groupthink kind of thing and be taken advantage of very easily.
Right. I think that is so important, but so difficult. We're in a day and age where, especially in the United States, everything is so tribal, and people really desperately want to believe anything that will score points for their team, whether or not it's true.
Right.
And so that makes them open to easily be manipulated by outside forces, and all they have to do is couch what they want in such a way that it looks like it's scoring points for your team, and you're going to jump all over that, and you're going to believe it, swallow it lock, stock, and barrel, when in reality it's nowhere near the truth. And then, because we live in this day and age where everybody interacts with devices so much,
right,
we're starting to lose the ability to have nuanced conversations with people who might not agree with us.
Yeah.
I know one of the greatest things, I think, for me about moving down to Panama part-time, or having a home down there, is that when I'm in Panama, there are a small number of gringos, expats who live in our little community. And most of them are people that I would never have hung out with in the United States. In the U.S., it's easy for us to become sort of siloed into what would they be called, like a neighborhood of like-minded people.
Right.
So I go to church with people that think like me, that look like me, that whatever, and I really don't have a lot of friends outside of that think differently. And so going and living in Panama, beggars can't be choosers. If you want to speak English to somebody, it's likely going to be somebody who doesn't think like you, has very, very different opinions. And it's been refreshing, actually, to relearn how to have a pleasant dinner conversation with a bunch of people who completely think different than I do.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
very difficult.
Because you don't learn new things. When there's a really famous book written by one of my mentors at the University of Southern California. He's passed away now, but one of the top scholars in the world, called Diffusion of Innovations, Everett Rogers. And innovations are new things, new ideas, new practices, and everything. And new ideas diffuse through oftentimes through weak ties, through people you're not strongly connected to. Because when you think of your closest circle of friends, you pretty much share a lot of the same information. When you learn something new, it's somebody that's outside of your network. Like you were talking about, people you run into Panama, they're not in your normal circles and everything, but you hear some diversity of opinions, and oftentimes you pick up new ideas and you consider alternative explanations and so forth that really enriches your ability to reason and think through problems. So
It is very, that's kind of the whole purpose of going to college, at least it used to be.
it used to,
Yeah, I'm not sure it is anymore, but it was to teach you to think critically, but also there's another side to that coin. If I'm going to put myself into situations where I can meet people that don't think like me, I've also got to learn to moderate my own opinions.
Yeah.
I don't have to change my opinions. I don't have to water down my opinions. I can still hold the same opinions I had before, but I have to learn to be diplomatic about how I express my opinions to other people. And that's something that's really been lost online these days, because people don't have to look at the person they're talking to in the face, and they can, man, people spew the most vile, hateful things. It's
That's why you were
unbelievable.
talking about, Chuck, social media. Social media is just a horrible place to try to have to try to resolve differing opinions and resolve conflicts and everything. I tell people, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do
I
it.
remember, there was a time when I was really bad about that. Just, I'd go down that rabbit hole. Connie'd be like, "Are you coming to bed tonight?" And I'd be like, "I can't. There's somebody wrong on the internet. I have to fix this,"
I know.
And it's like, I just had to learn that, no, that's not the place or the time to have those conversations. So, let's talk about some of the real dangerous types of propaganda that we see today. Can we talk about some specifics?
Yeah. When I was talking about the history of propaganda, now in the 21st century, we have new technology that's pushing the deception to levels that we've never experienced before. I mean, AI is getting so good that it can actually reproduce the voice of one of your family members, so that an AI could mimic a call from one of your family members, and you think it's really them because it's mimicking their voice and they're in need and so forth. So, the deception level of what you can do with editing now, and you can put different faces and different on different bodies. You can people are doing this in high school now. So
I've gotten to the point, the other day, just to give you an example. I was editing a CBN package that needed to go in right away. It was on a deadline, and I had to get on an airplane. And so I was editing it on the airplane, but then I needed to insert some voiceover, which is me, talking into the microphone.
Right.
So you can't see my face, you just hear my voice. But I can't do that on an airplane. It's too loud. There's no way. But
right.
I have an AI clone of my voice that I made, and I was able to go in and just type in the text I needed, clone that sentence of my voice, and drop it in, and you would never know the difference. So it's made me go, I think I need to have a code word for my family, since I travel so much, that if you get a phone call from me saying, "I need you to send money," or "I'm in trouble," or whatever, you need to ask for our code word so that you will know whether or not it's actually me.
Absolutely. I've talked about this with my family. So, okay, where did we go for your last birthday? that something AI is going to know, something that's very personal, and then you could pick up. One of my doctoral students, he did a whole ethical piece on a group of gamers that made up this character. They completely made up this character, is World of Warfare. The character didn't exist, and then they talked about this character, and then they were particularly targeting a particular magazine that they noticed was printing a lot of AI produced articles instead of doing their original research and so forth. And so they wanted to fool the AI, and in fact they did fool the AI. So the AI then picked up on this character and so forth, and this went on and on. If they just totally made, it's really
it's made fools out of the news
out of them.
Yeah,
and because artificial intelligence is just picking up what's out there in the junkyard, so it doesn't mean it's all accurate. A lot of it is picking up in false. Like I was asking AI about because one of your questions was about what are recent propaganda examples, and of course the recent propaganda examples were a lot of it having to do with health issues, and particularly the pandemic and all this stuff, and they're still picking up that.
You gotta be careful talking about that. We'll get demonetized on YouTube if you don't mention the C word. We'll get demonetized. They'll kick us off of YouTube for even mentioning it.
What's the C word? The C word. Yeah. And so they were that very
You're
thing
right.
that you're talking about. Yeah.
There's a ton. Now, also, actually, I just interviewed earlier today Chris Cappy. He's a YouTuber and a former infantryman who went over to Ukraine, and we were talking off camera about how incredible the propaganda machine is. That when you actually get on the ground in Ukraine, it's like you go, this is nothing like all the stuff that I've been hearing.
Yes.
All this stuff that's come out about the war. There was so much that was sent directly by Russia, and you can't get Americans to even believe that they've been swayed by Russian propaganda, but they have, and you can just. I've made videos about it. There was so much of this. For example, the idea that the United States had bioweapons labs that were making viruses to unleash on Russia in Ukraine. And they took the kernel of truth that the United States was funding biolabs that were defensive in nature in order to tell if there was some weaponized form of like anthrax or something that was floating around. And just twisted that just a little bit and made them offensive in nature, and then put that propaganda out like crazy. And there, to this day, if I want to see my comment feed absolutely explode with angry messages from people, all I have to do is say that there were no bioweapons labs in Ukraine, and they just lose their minds. So this is being used to great effect. I would say even better than, that probably the only battlefield upon which the Russians are actually winning the war in Ukraine is on the information battlefield. And that might be enough if they manage to win well enough in the information battle space. That might do it for them.
Absolutely. They have such a long history of because of controlling all the media, of manipulating media, creating disinformation campaigns, which you're purposefully putting out false information, misleading information. They're masters at this, and because
you and I are from the same era, and you remember during the Cold War. Talk about some of the ways that they put out propaganda during the Cold War and how that's changed today.
Originally they're of course they're using a lot of they're using symbolic, signs and symbols and, in print media and so forth. But now, and then they control their television, they control their newspapers, they control, so basically they control the entire information environment and manipulated that information environment to portray other countries exactly the way they wanted them to portray Russia the way they wanted them to portray communism in such a positive light and not talk about any of the real problems and so forth. And so, people grow up in that information environment. They don't realize they're totally living in a manipulated war. I mean, world, totally manipulated. It's kind of like what was that movie with Jim Carrey where he's living in that world,
Right.
and so he comes to the wall and he goes, he was being manipulated in the world.
The whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I forget the name of that movie. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'll think of it in a minute, probably 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
To your point, one of the things that I've seen as I've done reporting from wars and disasters around the world is if there is any war or any conflict, let's say, in the United States that makes the United States look bad. So Black Lives Matter, Antifa riots,
Right.
LGBTQ riot, anything where there's rioting and violence and things like that. When I go there to report on that stuff, I will run into a lot of reporters from Russian state media, RT and others. Okay,
Right.
Rosnefsky or whatever that is. Anyway, but if you go, let's say, to a hurricane where there's a bunch of people that have been devastated in an area, and people are coming from all over the country at their own expense and bringing food and water and shelter and help to these people,
Right.
you'll never see RT there. You'll never see the Russian propaganda media there because they want to show all the things that make America look like it's falling apart.
Yeah.
And none of the things that look like it's that it's a good place. Okay?
And they're actually contributing to falling apart. I mean, part of the propaganda strategy of let's say we'll take both Russia, China. You asked also about North Korea, Iran, or so forth, is to stir up hatred, one group against another in the United States. It's the age-old tactic. Jesus referred to it. A house divided itself cannot stand. And so it's that whole thing: divide and conquer. And so they use bots and so forth. So they have to stir up. They have to stir up men against women. They have to stir up one ethnic group against another ethnic group. And stir up. Democrats hating Republicans or Republicans hating anywhere they can create division because it's divide and conquer. They try to stir up division. Now, Russia is more aggressive at this type of propaganda, at this type of strategy. They really want to disrupt. They really want to destabilize the United States, whereas China's a little bit different. China tries to portray itself in more of a positive light. They use a lot of soft propaganda,
espionage, I would say.
Soft. They call it soft power. Like they'll take advantage of, like hosting the Olympics. We really are a great country. We're a reasonable country. We want to work with other people. We want, and so that's more of their strategy. But they're all seeding into division, and it seems like so many Americans are not. They're not aware of this, and they fall right into this.
My friend Michael Yon has talked a lot about this because he kind of has studied information warfare quite a bit and read a lot of books on it. But one of the things he pointed out was that China is building massive museums all over the world, and filling these museums in such a way that makes China look good and the United States look bad. Or if you, for example, were to go to, I went to a museum in Moscow one time, and or if you go to a museum in Cuba or in Vietnam or someplace like that, what you'll find is that if you went to a museum in Vietnam, you would think the Vietnamese won the Vietnam War. Like just absolutely wiped the floor with the Americans, wiped out the Americans.
Yeah.
If you go to any place where there was a major battle, especially the ones that the United States actually won in Vietnam, whether that was the Tet Offensive or that was at Quai Son or any of those places, there will be a huge monument there to the great victory that took place there on the side of the North Vietnamese.
Right.
So it's interesting how they work very hard to craft people's perceptions of things. And I think if people really understood how much of what they are presented with is a lie on its face,
Yeah.
they would be absolutely flabbergasted.
Yeah. I
Do
know.
you agree?
I talk to my students about the outright, manipulation by algorithms of information. For like everyone uses Google, and I have to tell them over and again, no, Google is not neutral. It's not politically neutral in any sense of the word. Go to China and type in Tiananmen Square in a Google search, and you know what you get?
Won't come up.
Yeah, nothing about the
Welcome
Tiananmen Square protests, the tanks, no, that's all wiped clean, and Google knows that, and they compromise and so forth. You remember when the most recent situation with the attempt on President Trump's life. You Googled it, all these other old assassinations come up. They bury stories. They bury things on page 15, 20. You won't get to it and so forth.
That's right.
So information is being manipulated all the time. You were talking about YouTube. YouTube censors information.
No question.
Yeah.
No question.
So, and I hope this doesn't get our video off, but they admit that.
Yeah, no, there's no question they do. As a matter of fact, like I say, there are certain words, if I even say them on my channel, I'll get a strike.
Right,
and you say that,
they're looking for those words, and then,
they have programmed their algorithm to do that. Matter of fact, we were just talking to our business manager yesterday. She called, actually got a hold of somebody at YouTube and was going through, because we've reached a place now in the size of our channel that we have a number we can call. And so she's asking him, like, I was supposed to get a play button when I hit 100,000 subs, and I'm at 150,000. Still haven't got a play button. Not that I really care. I mean, a play button and $3 will get you a cup of coffee.
Right.
But I just wondering, like, what happened to it. And he looked and he said, "Oh, well, your account's been flagged as spreading propaganda," and so they're not going to do it. And it's like, okay, whatever. So I remember during the war in Afghanistan, one time, this, to your point, I was sitting in a chow hall in Afghanistan, and it was at a time when things were pretty quiet over there, and there was not much going on. And as a matter of fact, it was kind of down toward the end of the war. It was one of my last trips there. And CNN had a interview, a talking head on that was talking about the war and what was going on, and blah, 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 whatever. And as background footage, they were showing these scenes of very intense combat of U.S. troops in firefights and just, running and explosions and all this stuff. And I was looking at that, and I recognized that footage was actually from like 3 years or 4 years earlier in Iraq. And it was just like file footage. They were just throwing this stuff up, but it made it look so like things are so bad in Afghanistan right now. And I remember looking around me at the guys, and I was like, is this accurate? And they're like, oh my gosh, we haven't seen any combat like that for years over here. But so it's not just what stories they choose to tell and choose not to tell, but it's how they tell them and what visuals they show as well, that they are intentionally trying to craft your understanding of what's going on. And it's so easy to do because if you've never been to Afghanistan,
Yeah.
as I always say, the news is about reporting the out of the ordinary. And so when something blows up in Afghanistan, that's out of the ordinary. Then we go report that.
Right.
But if you've never been there, you don't have any context in which to put it. And therefore, for you, explosions in Afghanistan are going to be the ordinary in your mind.
Right.
And so it's kind of incumbent upon journalists to do a better job of showing how extraordinary those things are. And they're easy ways to do that, but they're not sexy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the colloquial term that people who study propaganda use is to control the narrative, and even the propaganda agencies of every country, that's what they want to do, control the narrative, because the story, the people think in like narratives. They want you to get a certain feeling, a certain sense. And oftentimes those narratives can be very much depart from reality. Like you like you were saying, you're there and you know the situation, but the narrative that's going out is totally different than
totally
what
different.
the reality is.
Totally different.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, just yesterday, when I watched that Senate committee hearing on Panama, I watched the whole thing, and I came out of it with that was a pretty reasonable thing, and it kind of showed both sides and helped people understand. And then you look at the reporting on X, where they would take a little snippet out of something somebody said,
Right.
and cut out the part where they qualified what they were saying. Well, there are no Chinese troops manning the canal, but there probably are Chinese spies in Panama. And they would just take out the part where there probably are Chinese spies in Panama, and they would put that on social media and go, aha, this is why we need to invade Panama.
Yeah.
And I'd go oh my goodness, that's so irresponsible to do.
Yeah. Never mind the Chinese spies that are in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, really.
That almost every university in the country that's taken Chinese research dollars. There's so many professors on the take from China, that are doing their research.
We're going to do a special video about the 1,000 Talents program very soon. We've been talking about that. Have you seen any attempts by outside parties to influence Regent, or because like we talked about on previous podcasts, the Confucius Institutes and the Qataris dumping money into colleges around the globe, the 1,000 Talents program, things like that from China. What have you seen?
We don't get too much outside research money. I'm working on a project right now for the Lilly Foundation, but it's a project on doing research within churches, evangelical churches, and everything. So no, we don't have really much of that influence. But not to say that the philosophies that are out there don't influence various professors and so forth.
So it seems to me like your title really should be the professor of discernment, because that's really what it comes down to, doesn't it? We want teach these kids to have discernment in what they're consuming, and how much of it they believe.
Yeah, it's so and I know most of the audience here are Christians, but even if you're not a Christian, you really have to think critically about the information that you're receiving, and you need to think, okay, who is putting out this information? Who are they? What is their purpose in putting out this information? And do they have an agenda here? Are they providing all sides of the story and so forth? So you really, because there's so much false stuff out here. I'll give you a good example. The Atlantic ran this article that really was made Trump look horrible. They said that he disparaged troops when he was in Normandy, and they attributed all these things, but no, they got nobody on record. Nobody. It was all anonymous.
I remember that.
thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so I was doing a piece actually on Regent on. They asked me to do a piece like on propaganda and misinformation and everything, and I said, okay, so let's follow the money. Okay, who owns the Atlantic? So I have everyone look it up. Yes, the former wife, of the founder of Apple. Okay, and she's a billionaire. She was
Probably a heavy donor to Democratic causes.
and let's say
You
where
can see
did
where
she
this is
give her
going.
money? Yeah,
Yeah.
Lorene Powell. Where does she give her money to? Democratic causes all over the country and everything. Okay. And what is her ideology? And then you can look it up, her statements and everything. So she's very far progressive to the left ideologically. Okay. That's what you're going to get. The Atlantic. The Atlantic is an unbiased. It's not good journalism by any sense of the word. It's propaganda.
So, what tools are there any tools that you use when you try to do something like this? When you say, "Okay, I heard X, now I'm going to go see how much of that is actually true and how much of it is false." I mean, when I hear something like that, my first instinct is I'm going to get on a plane and I'm going to go there and I'm going to find out for myself. But not everybody has that ability.
Yeah.
And so, so what tools can you recommend to people that can help them?
The number one tool if you're a Christian is being led by the Holy Spirit, being sensitive to the Holy Spirit. There's a lot of Bible verses on deception, on falsehood, on misinformation. In fact, God says He hates falsehood and He hates those that create it. It's pretty strong words. And we have to realize that we live in an environment where there is another dimension. There's a spiritual dimension and there's a spiritual warfare dimension, and that spiritual warfare dimension is very real. And I just saw how during the pandemic how easily people were manipulated without checking out the facts and the sources and doing research for themselves, and just follow blindly whatever they were told to do. Just we can't do that. We really have to think critically and use multiple sources of information. Don't get in an echo chamber. Yes, you might like Fox News. I think Fox News probably is one of the least biased among the news agencies. But go get some other news sources too to see the other perspectives, even though they're going to come from a different perspective, maybe a liberal perspective or whatever. Or check out the BBC, or check out, get a range of information so you're not getting all your information from a single source. And don't get all your information, and don't take information as factual in online environments such as social media. They're notorious for false information. So don't get information from there.
It's really hard because everybody, when it comes to information, everybody these days is essentially drinking through a fire hose.
Yeah.
And there's so much information overload out there. It is hard to know, who you can trust. And I think you're hitting the nail right on the head there, that when it comes to discernment, there is an element of the Holy Spirit that has to be involved in your life. Mm-hmm. And this is why you'll hear me say on my podcast over and over again, I want to be concerned about truth over everything.
Right.
I don't want to follow one team or another. I don't want to be a part of one tribe or another. That's right. I want to say what is true, whether or not it aligns with my team.
Right.
Because I do have a team, and I recognize that. And there are times when I'm quite disappointed to have to report things that kind of make my team or somebody on my team look bad. Yeah. But it is imperative to be to make truth paramount.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
Whether or not it comports with your opinions or with what you're seeing in your echo chamber.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and and so that has to be guarded, and a lot of people have compromised on that.
Yeah.
It, it's mostly true, or or it
Hmm.
fits the narrative, even though it didn't really happen. It fits the narrative. No, no,
Hmm.
it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
either
if it
happened or
didn't
did
happen,
not happen.
we should say so.
Yeah,
Or I mean, really, I always say that we should start by looking at uh, every situation, every news story from a moral perspective,
hmm,
and then worry about the political perspective last.
right.
And if we make a habit of trying to say, look, I'm going to try to say what is right here,
Yeah,
even if it's costly to me politically, even if it's uncomfortable, whatever. I'm going to do what's right,
hmm,
and I'm going to let the chips fall where they may. And because what's right is always smart.
right.
That's what I was taught anyway.
Yeah.
So
Note it, also, pay attention to the cliches, the symbols, the way things are framed, and that's everything. And things, you can pick up. Things are framed, so differently. I mean, think of how
mhm,
the various news agencies are framing. Right now, the people that have come illegally into the country that are now being sent back to their countries and so forth. So the framing is so different depending on
yeah,
what sources
sure,
you're looking at. But be sensitive to those kinds of things, how things are framed, and be sensitive to when you're being manipulated by
mhm,
fear or by concern or by anger or something. Don't allow yourselves to be manipulated like that, because those
yeah,
are powerful persuasion strategies that make you
yeah.
react and act out of your emotion rather than out of reason.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should be very, very careful because most of the world around us is set up uh, to use us,
Hmm.
to abuse us,
Right.
and to take advantage of us, whether it's financially, emotionally, relationally, however. And we just have to learn to be a little skeptical, or
Yeah.
a lot skeptical,
Yeah.
and of pretty much everything we see that's not standing right in front of us
Yeah.
anymore.
And the other thing I would say is uh, when you're getting sources of news and information, always look for the context. One thing I really appreciate, Chuck, about the way you report the news is you provide so much context. The average news story is less than a minute,
Yeah.
and you have no context, but you provide a lot of context. And the more context you provide, the more you can get a really correct understanding or a balanced understanding of the situation. And you can't do that when you're doing 1 minute reports. That's
That's
why
true.
when you go into detail and provide all that context, it really helps people to understand much more accurately what's going on.
Well, that's what the hot zone's all about, and that's why we brought you on, Bill. So
Yeah,
thank you very much for being with us.
absolutely.
Do you have any books that you recommend if people want to get better at spotting propaganda and understanding it?
This is this book. I would start with this book. This is a good book,
I don't
and
know. That looks pretty thick. I don't know if
yeah. Oh, it's written.
does it have any
It's
pictures?
really, yeah. It's got pictures in it,
Oh,
and
it has pictures. Okay,
yeah,
well that's
yeah.
all I need.
It's got pictures in it. Pratkinis and Aronson, The Age of Propaganda, The Everyday Use and Abuse of Persuasion. It's an easy read, and you can get this, used for probably $5 or something on Amazon. So a used
Okay.
copy. So yeah, and then this one's really really good. This is in its ninth edition. I use this in one of my classes, media literacy, because a lot of what we're
I've
talking
seen that
about
one.
is becoming media literate. We have to understand how media is created, how it's controlled, how it's manipulated, how it's produced, and so forth. And that's what this book's all about. And again, you can get an older edition and cheaply.
Hmm. I think I have one of those on
That's by James Potter,
somewhere here.
who's at
I think Rob
UC
Allman gave
Santa
it to me.
Barbara. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate it.
All right.
And we'll hope to have you on again sometime.
Yeah, let's do it again, Chuck. Sounds great. Thank you so
All
much.
right. God bless you, Bill. Thank you very
Great
much.
to be with your audience. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.